investors, our sponsors at this year's Community Leaders Dinner. And I think we're gonna have a real treat for you tonight, as our speaker is someone that all of you have been anxious to hear from. You've heard a little bit, but tonight we're gonna have an opportunity to really get to know you just a little better as you now are in your new community of Bloomington-Normal.
Yep. Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the honor of speaking, and we're gonna have a good discussion. Hopefully
Great.
Some good questions.
Let's get comfortable. So for the audience, tonight's is going to be on an interview mode. So for the next half hour, kind of think of me as Ted Koppel. Okay, now I know some of you are going, you look more like Wilford Brimley than Ted Koppel. But, would you work with me just a little bit here? I'd appreciate that. So the real star here is RJ, and we truly appreciate not only you being here tonight, but what you've done for our community. So let's get at it. So tell us a little bit about yourself. What was your interest in the automotive industry to think about a startup? Has this been a passion from a young age?
Yeah, so I've been an absolute enthusiast for things that move, but in particular, automobiles and cars, since I was about this tall. So from about, I don't know, maybe the age 20 or so, realized I wanted to do something on my own and really began pursuing that. And as you can imagine, this is a very complex endeavor, lots of moving pieces, enormous capital requirements, and really didn't plan on starting this as quickly as I did, but ultimately saw the opportunity that we see in front of us today in terms of all the really big changes happening in automotive. So shifts in terms of how we power our vehicles, a shift in terms of how we control the vehicles with increasing levels of autonomy, and then a really big shift in what we think about in terms of the business model, what the business looks like, what the customer model is, how you purchase a vehicle, all these things going through pretty significant transformations. And it was really those set of changes that created such an exciting opportunity for us to start and build this company.
Wow. So you've got companies in how many operations in how many places now?
So we have about 450 employees, and we're split between two operations on the West Coast. We have an office in San Jose, California, and that houses all of our self-driving team and our connectivity platform. And then we have an office in Irvine, California, that does all of our battery and what we call propulsion system. And then here in the Midwest, obviously, we have our facility here, and as was said before, we have about 65 people here at the plant getting that set up for us to start producing the vehicle relatively soon. And then our fourth location is just outside of Detroit, where we have all of our traditional vehicle platform work, so body engineering, interior engineering, those functions sitting there.
Talk a little bit about California, the battery operation. Is that, I know some of that's out there, but there's also some of that happening here too.
For sure. So when I mentioned the battery being in California, I'm referring to really all the technology development, particularly around how you control the battery. And when we think about an electric vehicle, we often think about the closest corollary. So we think about the small batteries you may use in home devices or the batteries in your phone. In a vehicle, it's a much more complex battery system. We're talking about something that has to control an enormous amount of energy. You have to charge it and discharge it a lot under various temperature, under various drive conditions. So it takes a tremendous amount of sophistication in terms of the software necessary to control that. So we're creating that software system, or the brain, how to run the battery, as well as how we package the battery into what we call a module. And those modules and then the subsequent full pack that those modules go into are being built here at Normal. Currently, there's a pilot line that's building them in Irvine, but the team here is in the process of setting up the battery line to produce these at a much higher volume as we go into production.
Great. I'm going to come back to that.
Sure.
Because that's the part I think that is going to be fascinating to a lot of people. But I've heard stories, so I'm going to go right to the source here. But what attracted your company, to the Bloomington-Normal area?
So I'll make sure I get. Hopefully, the story you heard is correct, but if not, I'll address that. So, really honestly, we originally knew of this community in this area because of the asset, because of the plant. And when we first came out here to look at that facility, we were coming out here to look at it from the context of buying equipment. So we were, the facility was being set up for an auction, and we came out and said, let's look at what's there. And in fact, I wasn't on that first trip. And that night, after that visit, I got a call, and the team said to me, you've got to come out here. And they said, this plant is amazing. And I said, what else? They said, well, the community around it, this is a gem of a place. We just spent an hour in a bar. The people are really nice. So I mean, all jokes aside, that what was said before about the community being part of the business development activity, it couldn't be more true. So I then came out and came out sort of neutrally. Came out. I said, let me see what's here. And we then spent a couple of days on site. We actually brought some of our board of directors out, one of which who's a renowned manufacturing expert. And we went about and then spending some time getting to know the area. And actually, the board spent more time trying to understand the community, which is a really important thing. Ultimately, running a plant, you have to have the equipment, you have to have a lot of the investment to go in to build the equipment, but people run the plant. The community runs the plant. And what we discovered here, well beyond this beautiful facility, which has got great equipment and was well maintained and lots of the right types of investment going into it, there's a community here that has a passion and energy for doing something special. And what we met, not only within the folks that worked at this facility, but the folks surrounding it, was an energy to do something cool, to do something impactful, to bring not only this plant to life, but to continue to grow and build what you guys have here. So we were very fortunate and continue to be impressed and really excited about what we find here. Not only the warm welcome, but the continued support in terms of how we're building out this facility. We're really pleased to now have hired, as we said, just over about 60 people at the facility. Over the course of the next year and a half, 2 years, we'll be hiring a lot more. But it's really it's a wonderful community, lots of energy, lots of passion, and that's really what we're most excited about.
See, every one of you are an economic developer, and you didn't know it.
Yeah.
But that's a great story, and it was the story I had heard, so thank you for that. So automobiles have been around for 120 some years, and they seem to have constantly been evolving, but probably never as fast as they are now. Where does Rivian fit in that evolution?
Yeah, so if you think of the automotive industry in a very broad sense, this is an industry that's been largely evolutionary. So we've seen it go from, 120 years ago, from the transition from a horse to a car, to then a series of iterations where the car has gotten better and better. So we figured out how to make it a lot less noisy. We figured out how to keep the weather out. We figured out how to improve the emissions. And we're at an inflection point in the history of the automobile where the whole system is going to be going through substantial changes such that its impact and how we view it through the lens of society is going to be remarkably different than how we looked at it over the last 120 years. And of course, when we think about that, I mentioned these major trends, or what we would think of as like vectors of change, these big threads of change about how we think about mobility. The first, of course, is electrification. And as big as electrification seems, as impactful as that seems from a societal point of view, from a business model point of view, if the world was just electrifying, it wouldn't really change the fabric of how we think about mobility. It's really these other elements of change. And if you think of all this noise around this word mobility, you can simplify that down to really two other big elements of change. The first is us going from a world in which we, human beings, have operated the vehicles ourselves since the beginning, to a world that over the course of my lifetime, we're going to see the control of the vehicle shift from us as humans to the vehicle itself, where the vehicle starts controlling itself. And that has lots of implications, whether it's taking the kids to school on its own or providing mobility to the elderly. But what it really does is it unlocks how we think about consuming mobility, how we think about buying vehicles. Today, the way we buy a vehicle is we personally own it. We take ownership of the asset, and we don't use it very often. So it sits in our garage, it sits on the side of the street, it waits for us to come out and use it. Once the vehicle is capable of driving itself, it starts to reform how we think about consumption. You don't necessarily need to own it. You can share it. You can subscribe to it. You can use it once a week. You can use it once a month. You can have a selection of vehicles that you take a certain type of vehicle to go to and from the office and a different type of vehicle to take your family out on a road trip. So these are all big changes, and none of these are going to happen overnight. We're not talking about the world of 2020 for some of these. We're talking about the world of 2030, 2040, 2050. But it's precisely the scale of those changes, which is in some ways unimaginable, which creates a lot of opportunity. So with that said, the opportunity and the challenge, which we're so excited about, is we have to build simultaneously a company, a brand, a technology platform, an organization that can work in the world of largely today. So we launch in 2020, which will look about what it looks like today, meaning vehicles are controlled largely by humans. Those vehicles are personally owned. In our case, it's electric, so we've shifted on that one. But also simultaneously set up the roadmap for ourselves to transition to this world over the next several decades and make sure that the things we're building from a technology point of view, from a roadmap point of view, fit into that future state. So we've put an enormous amount of energy into thinking about how we architect the vehicle for that environment. So we've designed a vehicle that's fully electric. We've designed a vehicle that has a fairly high level of self-driving features. We've designed a vehicle that has a tremendous amount of connectivity, which allows it to monitor its health, allows us to create a whole host of features that help you discover things you can do with the vehicle. And all of that is built as a platform for which we can grow and continue to build the brand.
So let's talk a little bit about the autonomous part.
Sure.
Will these have that capability, but not, obviously, and my next question is about autonomous and how as a community we get to that, but will these have that capability now? So do the cars we're driving now have more capability than we know about?
It's a great question. So if you think about autonomy, we talk about it as if it's a light switch, or it's either on or off. There's a large range of different levels of self-driving capability. So in fact, most of the cars that you probably drove here today and have cruise control, that is a form of autonomy. It takes over speed control, of course, at a fixed speed. That's what would be called a level 0 feature. So it's a very low level of autonomy. But what we're going to start to see is an increasing level of control being taken on by the vehicles. So actually by regulation in the United States, for example, in 2019, next year, every new vehicle sold will have something called automatic emergency braking, which is a neat feature. It means the days of rear-ending the car in front of you will be over. It won't be possible for you to drive into the car in front of you. Now that's a safety feature. It's not something that takes the burden of driving off your hands. It doesn't mean you have to stop worrying about the brake pedal. But what we start to see is more features that will take some of the burden of driving off. So for us, we have something that allows you to get on the highway, and once you're on the highway, the vehicle will drive itself, meaning you can take your hands off the wheel, your eyes off the road, you can be on your phone, you can be watching a movie, you can be talking. And that doesn't mean it can drive empty between your house and your friend's house. It means on the highway, you can get some of your time back. And for us, it's an important feature because it speaks to our brand and the types of products we're launching. And if you think about all these changes that are occurring that I just talked about, that'll take decades in many cases to play out. For us, as I said, it was really important that our brand can transcend these big changes, that our brand can live past the switch away from steering wheels, the switch away from traditional customer models. And for us, the brand around enabling and driving adventure, meaning when I say adventure, it means the trip to the lake with the kids, the trip to grandma's house, the trip to the beach, the trip out, upstate. These adventures, these things you're going to do with your kids, with your friends, with your pets, with your gear, we want to enable. And that self-driving feature makes those types of trips easier. And there's a host of other really interesting and cool features that are embedded on the vehicle that also enable about that for us. But for us, the core is being part of that platform for experiencing life's adventures and exploring all those exciting things you can do.
So 2 years ago, the CEO of State Farm, Michael Tipsord, was sitting right here. And the question was asked, Mr. Tipsord, what is State Farm doing? How are they positioning themselves for the future of autonomous vehicles? And he goes, well, let me ask the audience a question. And he looked to this room and he goes, if as you were getting ready to get on the plane, you heard, ladies and gentlemen, there'll be no pilots on this plane. Computer will be flying for your safety. How many, show of hands, how many would get on the plane? And Not a hand went
Yeah.
up. How will this evolve? How will we, is it the next generation that's going to be more acceptable to that kind of travel, or that kind of handing over the authority
For sure.
to a computer?
And there's a couple of really important elements to this question. So the first is the recognition that this is not a light switch. So we won't wake up tomorrow with everything driving itself, with cars that you don't own, that are all 100% electric. That won't happen. So it's going to take years. It'll still take decades to be fully realized. But I think another way to look at that question, and it's an interesting example. So if, the question of would you get on the plane if it said a machine's going to fly it? Last year, in 2017, in the United States, 40,000 people died in car accidents. So just to give some scale to that number, that would be equivalent to one Boeing 737 crashing every single day just for the United States. So if I said to you guys as well that you're about to get on a plane, you're flying somewhere in the U.S., and one plane in this country, one 737, is going to crash today, would you get on it? And that's what it's like to drive today. 40,000 people. That's an enormous number. That's a Boeing 737 crashing every single day. And we've become so used to it, so numb to it, that we just accept it. So when we start to think about autonomy, its core emphasis, I mean, I use the example of automatic emergency braking as a lower level of autonomy, but the objective is to make vehicles safer. So, our kids, our friends, our families aren't at risk to be on the road. And I think the data will have to help show that. Comfort will have to come into the system where we start to see the level of safety on our highways and our roads go up. And we will see that. And I think that's, of course, a focus for us. And in how we talk about any of our self-driving features, safety is extremely important. The vehicles have to be orders of magnitude safer than human operation. But you're certainly on point. That's a very important consideration, something people certainly think about.
We're going to have to evolve, aren't we?
Yeah.
So from an outside view, it seems like there's an awful lot of competition. We the name we all hear is Tesla.
Yep.
But, Hyundai, Chevy Bolt, Nissan Leaf. One of the things that I've heard, and maybe you can speak to, is the range that you might be looking at, that this anxiety of how far I go in an electric vehicle and before I can charge again.
Yeah. So if you think about the vehicle space and you look at the market for electric miles, or even broader than that, the market for miles, to buy a vehicle and what would cause someone to pick a Rivian over another vehicle, this comes back to, I think, the most fundamental of questions for us as a company and for me in forming and building this business, which is, why do we exist? And it's a really important question. And if we can't answer that question, I shouldn't be sitting here. Our team shouldn't be, have joined the company from other companies. It's the foundation of why we exist. So for us, as we look out at the whole space of vehicles, what we've seen happen really over the last 15, 20 years is within the space of vehicles that people aspire to, vehicles that people get excited about, we've seen a concentration of vehicles that are less focused on utility. They're vehicles that we think of as being a bit more like a suit, sort of like a suit and tie. They look nice, they're exciting, they're designed well, nice to drive, but they don't pass the litmus of would you put your kids in it and go to the beach? Would you throw the dog in the back? Would you pick up, 3 kids from a soccer game? And what we've seen happen is the need for that type of vehicle has driven the demand to grow for things like a Chevy Suburban or a Ford F-150. So we've seen these vehicles that do actually invite function in with really high price points, but without necessarily the excitement or the passion around them. So where we see an opportunity and need for us to exist is to go after the space of activity, the active customers, people who are going places, carrying things with their kids, with their gear, with their friends, and create a set of products that are truly aspirational and take the traditional trade-offs that exist in those segments. So if we think some of the SUVs or trucks I talked about, these are not vehicles that are particularly fuel efficient. These are not vehicles that are particularly exciting. And they're vehicles that you've made big trade-offs to access that functionality or that utility. And the price points are now very high, by the way. So they're in many cases higher than the BMW or the Mercedes or the Tesla that you might have in your garage. So we see this as such a wonderful chance to reset how we think about trade-offs between performance, on-road, off-road, utility, and very importantly, efficiency. And a lot of the other electric vehicles that are in this space are either focusing on something that's a bit more, call it commoditized, not necessarily as desirable or exciting, in many cases very small vehicles, or something that's a bit less function-driven. So, you know, we see Tesla in this space, we see a number of other high-end manufacturers building products in that space. But for us, it was the ability to bring function and utility and invite usage in, while still delivering a lot of excitement, still delivering something that you look at and you're like, man, I'm excited to be in that. I'm excited to put my family into that. And that's the type of vehicle and of course the brand that we want to establish.
What kind of distance are we going to talk?
So you did ask that and I did not answer that.
I'm trying to pin you down just a little.
No, so range on the vehicle, so on a vehicle that is designed for adventure, it has to be able to go places. It can't be tethered to a plug. So our largest battery pack gives us close to 425 miles in the case of our pickup, and close to 450 miles in the case of our SUV.
Wow. And as a society, we're not seeing a lot of sedans being made anymore. We're moving more to the SUV, aren't we?
As I said, that was a part of the point. I think we've seen a lot of shift towards these big, expensive, inefficient SUVs, and clearly demand is there. Clearly the market is asking for that, asking for products that have that kind of functionality. But we don't see the need to compromise with regards to fuel economy or performance. It can still be a really fun to drive vehicle and a really efficient vehicle and something that fits, you know, 2 dogs and 3 kids.
Many people may not know this, but I want to bring it up and see what motivates you. Rivian's been very engaged in this community since your arrival. You hosted the Ecology Action Center's annual Household Hazardous Waste Collection, which if any of you went out there, it was the first time many of you found out where the old track was that went around the plant out there. You did a 40 and 40 hackathon that was sponsored there. 4-H robotics team was there. Police and fire training are able to use the facility for that work. What motivates you to give back to the community?
So as I said at the start, you know, we're here because of the community, and you know, we think of our organization. We have our suppliers, we have our internal team members, we have partners that we're working with on various pieces of technology, but we view as an extension of our organization the community that we operate in, and this is the same in all the locations that we operate, where we take a very seriously the responsibility we have to be active participants in the community, and you know, we're blessed with this beautiful facility that has the space to be able to enable some of these things. So it's been a lot of fun and a real pleasure to open that up and allow people to come in and use that. And as we continue to grow, and we've said this a few times, we'll continue to look for opportunities to be active and to be certainly very visible within the community.
Has there been any thoughts where the first vehicles may go?
The very first vehicle goes to, no, it goes to our largest shareholder.
Okay, all right.
I'm actually fairly far down on the list. Maybe in the first year I'll get one.
There we go.
Yeah.
Where will people be able to purchase it? Are you going to have dealerships, or are you thinking partnering with somebody? Or?
So I guess first, we're not, maybe folks thought we were going to be showing a vehicle on the screen today. I apologize, we're not. But we're revealing our 2 production launch vehicles in November of this year at the LA Auto Show. So end of November, we're revealing both our reimagined pickup, and you'll see it takes a lot of what you would think about in terms of a pickup and really resets or rethinks that. And then our 7-passenger SUV. And those 2 products we're going to be revealing. They'll be very, very close to the final production version, both in terms of performance, the specifications, and of course the look. And it's at that moment that we'll then open up a pre-order process. So we'll start taking orders on the vehicle. And in parallel to that, we'll be setting up all of our launch locations in terms of retail centers. And as you can imagine, we won't be able to be in every market on day one. So in year 1, we'll be in roughly 20 markets. This will be one of them with a factory store. And then... Yeah. And then over time, we'll continue to add additional markets so that roughly by year 6, year 7, we'll have about 100 retail locations throughout the country.
Great. I mentioned earlier I was going to get back to battery because I think there's been discussion, and I've heard you talking a little bit about other applications for what you've designed. Can you talk a little bit about that without divulging too much.
Sure, sure. So I talked about this trend towards electrification, and maybe to give some context on it, because one could be very bearish or very bullish on electrification. To remove the element of debate, if we take time to infinite, take time out 50 years or 100 years, it's indisputable that the world will have to transition to things powered by electrons as opposed to things powered by fossil fuels, simply because we have a very finite supply of fossil fuels on this planet. So it's actually remarkable. We as a planet took about 300 million years to build up all the liquid fuel that's underneath the Earth's surface. And in about 100 years, we've used half of it. So it's remarkable just from the time scales. 300 million years to build up this base of fuel, we used half of it in 100. So in the absolute worst case, in about 100 years, either we stop having the level of mobility that we know as a planet today, or we find new ways to power the things that move on our planet. And we've been talking in this discussion about vehicles, and of course in the context of our vehicle, but there's many other things that move on this planet that we'll need to electrify as well. So think jet skis, snowmobiles, agricultural equipment, forklifts. These are all things that, over the course of my lifetime, we'll start to electrify, and we'll start to replace these micro, power plants with these energy storage devices, these batteries. And for us, we see that as a beautiful opportunity. It's a beautiful opportunity to partner with the constructors or the builders of a lot of these things that move, whether they're jet skis or snowmobiles, and leverage some of the incredible technology we've built around battery systems and around battery control. And I talked before about the software to control a battery. To shed a little bit more light on it, it's really one of the things I'm most passionate about in terms of what we're doing. It's really exciting. And you think about a battery that goes into a vehicle, and every vehicle on the road today, that battery performs the same for me as it would for Mike, as it would for any of you, meaning it's controlled the same way, despite the fact that we may drive very differently, we may charge our vehicles very differently. So what our battery system does is it actually is smart. It actually has a learning mechanism within it. It's an AI mechanism. So it says, Mike charges once a week, I charge once a day, someone else might charge twice a week. And the various control parameters within the software set, within the control system, in our system, are being optimized real time. And it's constantly adjusting to make it the best battery for Mike, the best battery for me. And why does that matter? From a customer-facing point of view, do you care? Well, it really starts to matter because it increases the health of the battery. It allows the battery to last much longer. So in our case, about 3 times longer than a traditional battery. But it's also really interesting for us as a business because we can put that battery and its brain, this learning system, into other applications. We can drop it into a snowmobile. We can drop it into a jet ski. We can drop it into a piece of agricultural equipment. So certainly a significant part of our business is leveraging the technology we built around batteries and battery control systems to help electrify the things that move on our planet. And a lot of the companies that build those things that move on our planet exist here in the Midwest, which is also really helpful for us as well.
So Bloomington-Normal is halfway between Chicago and St. Louis. So we want to know, Cubs or Cardinals?
Oh, man. I don't want to make any enemies in here. So,
right.
so fortunately, I'm actually not a huge sports fan, so I can pull myself out of this one. I'm happy either way.
There you go. You made half this audience happy.
Yeah.
The other half really wanted to know.
Yeah.
So. Well, we're about out of time. Is there anything else you want to share about the future or the plant or the community and things that we can help you with?
Sure. Maybe just a couple of points. I think first, just to restate something I said at the beginning, and that's thank you. Thank you to the community for welcoming us in. Thank you to the community for all the support you provided, both from the local leadership, but also from just the folks living in the community. We've been able to be very fortunate to hire a number of folks back into the plant. We hope to do more of that. But just the all-around enthusiasm for what we're doing, and not just to myself, but to the team, is truly outstanding. It's really fun to be part of a community that you feel and can sense they're rooting for you. So that, again, thank you. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is perhaps what's on folks' mind is what's going to happen next. Where do we stand in terms of timeline? We've talked about the reveal of products in November. Those products that we're revealing in November, those go into production about 2 years from now. So what does that mean from a hiring point of view? What does it mean from within the facility point of view? So today, we're in the process of taking everything that exists within this facility and reformulating that for our products. And some aspects of the plant are remaining essentially as they were, maybe with some fresh paint, but otherwise essentially as they were. But others have to change quite dramatically. So if we think about the body system, for example, the structure of the vehicle, our vehicles are built very differently than a Mitsubishi product, and of course look very different. So all of that body system, the body plant, is being reset. In fact, our team has taken most of the Mitsubishi equipment out, and we're now in the process of specifying and laying out the equipment that's going to be going back in. Similarly, with the stamping operation, that's the presses themselves are in beautiful condition. We're in the process of setting those up to run and build parts, not just for us, but for other companies in the area. But all the dies that are specific to our product have to be built, and these take a long time. Some of these dies, these are giant tools. They take 52 weeks to build one tool. So all that's happening in parallel. And the part of the plant that's perhaps going to be the most different from what was there in the past, of course, has to do with how the vehicles are powered. So these are electric vehicles, not gasoline vehicles. And we're building, as I said before, a battery line in this facility that does what we're doing today, largely in a manual process on a pilot line in our battery development facility, in a highly automated line that can produce modules very quickly. So we can produce battery packs essentially faster than anyone is currently producing them, which is important given the size of our battery pack. And that's all going to be coming online over the next 12 to 18 months, those systems. So we'll start to see more things going in. It may not be visible from the road. But as that starts to occur, we'll also be ramping up our hiring, bringing more people from the community in. This table that's sitting here right in front of me, this is a good portion of our plant leadership team. And they've done an outstanding job of engaging with the community to do that. And I should say that it's been really exciting to do that. It's also exciting to know how closely we're being watched. I mean, I say that with a smile. So we replaced the sign out front, and we got like 15 phone calls that said, "Why'd you take the sign down?" I said, "Because we're putting a better one up." So I'm actually glad you can't see what's happening inside the facility because we're moving a lot of things around. But so we're going to have a new face go onto the building fairly soon, too. So you'll see an exterior new front entrance that's going to go up in the next couple of months. Don't worry, we're not tearing the building down. We're just putting a new face on. But all of that will start to come together. And as that does, we'll also set up some ways to communicate and show that, particularly some of the really exciting parts about the plant, like the battery facility.
Great. RJ, thank you very much for tonight. I've got a few other thank yous that I want to have. Advocate and OSF Healthcare, thank you again for what you give back to this community and make it such a great place. Thank you to Sarah and our sponsors. Many of you may not know them, but when you were checking in, the young ladies that we're helping tonight are student athletes at Illinois State University. Thank you to all of you for tonight. To the DoubleTree staff and hotel, thank you. Fantastic job tonight. And Jared said it earlier, but this couldn't have happened without the EDC staff. And we're running shorthanded right now. And instead of a team of 6, it's a team of 4. So to pull this off, but Amy Denham, Zach Dietmeyer, Becky Kirkpatrick, thank you so much for what you've done to make it happen. So this wraps up our evening. We hope you enjoyed yourself. We look forward to next year. And please have a safe drive home tonight.
Thanks, Mike. That's good. Thanks.